It started with a letter and a name he couldn't forget. Jesse Klein didn't believe in fate. Not after the war. Not after everything he'd seen men do to one another. But when he held that crumpled envelope with the advertisement for a bride, honest, able-bodied woman, no attachments, willing to relocate, fee guaranteed, something inside him shifted. He hadn't planned on marrying. Hell, he barely remembered how to speak to a woman without flinching. Yet here he was, riding back from the post office with a paper that might change his life stuffed in his coat pocket. The sky over Wyoming stretched wide and empty, as if the land had been scraped raw. It matched Jesse's mood too well. Since the end of the war, the only things he'd built were fences that wouldn't hold, a roof that always leaked, and silence between him and the rest of the world. But winter had been rough, and the wind had howled too long without another voice inside his cabin to answer it. That silence had gotten heavy, too heavy. Jesse had tried the saloons. He'd tried forgetting. He'd tried being someone he wasn't. But none of it stuck. There was always this pressure in his chest, like something unfinished was dragging behind him, and no matter how far he rode or how many bottles he emptied, it stayed. People in town didn't ask questions. They'd seen the scars under his collar, the way he twitched when a door slammed too hard. They just nodded politely, made space on the boardwalk when he passed, and whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. But Jesse wasn't bothered. He didn't come here to be liked. He came to disappear. So when the ad from Montana showed up tacked to the post office board, it didn't feel like a chance. It felt like surrender. He'd sent back a single line, "I'll cover your fee. Arrive by spring thaw." JK. He didn't sign with his full name. Part of him figured she wouldn't come. Part of him hoped she wouldn't. But that was weeks ago, and now it was mid-March. Snow had started to melt down the edges of the hills. Rivers were waking up again. Jesse had set out one extra plate at the table for the past 3 nights. The truth was, he wasn't looking for love. He wasn't even sure he could feel something like that anymore. He needed help on the ranch, sure, but what he really needed was someone to keep the walls from closing in. Someone who wouldn't ask what the burn scars on his wrists were from. Someone who wouldn't look at the half-empty bottle on the porch and say a word. The day she arrived, the wind had settled. That alone was strange. Jesse had just come in from chopping kindling, his shirt damp with sweat in spite of the cold. The wagon was late. He figured she'd change her mind. And the dogs barked. A covered rig creaked down the path, drawn by 2 tired bays and a driver who barely spared Jesse a glance. But on the bench beside him sat a woman wrapped in a threadbare coat, her hands white around a canvas bag. She wasn't what Jesse expected. She was younger, pale, eyes sharp as broken glass, but hiding something deeper behind them. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just climbed down stiffly when the wagon stopped, nodded to the driver, and stood there like she was waiting for a storm to knock her down. Jesse didn't know what to say. She wasn't a stranger in the usual sense. He'd paid for her, signed the agreement, but it still felt wrong, standing there like he was claiming livestock. "I'm Jesse," he finally said. "You got a name?" "Lena," she answered. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a while. She didn't offer a hand, didn't look him in the eye. He didn't ask anything else. Just nodded, took her bag, and gestured toward the cabin. The place wasn't much. 1 room, stove in the corner, single bed he'd split with his bedroll that morning to make space. He'd scrubbed the floor, boiled the linens, tried to make it look like something worth coming home to. Still, when she stepped inside, she flinched at the doorframe. He noticed. Jesse pointed to the shelf near the fire. "You can unpack over there. You hungry?" "No," she said too quickly. He nodded again. The dogs came in, noses twitching. One, Patch, trotted up to her and sat. She didn't move. Jesse didn't ask where she came from. He didn't need to. That night, Lena sat across from him at the table, picking at her bread like it might hurt her. She still hadn't taken off her coat. Jesse chewed in silence, letting the clock tick fill the room. "I don't expect anything," he said finally. "Not yet. You don't owe me nothing except what was agreed on. You can work when you're ready. No rush." She looked up for the first time. Her eyes were wide, almost suspicious. "I don't want your money back," he added. "I don't have it," she whispered. "I know." He didn't say more. That night, he laid the bedroll on the floor near the stove and gave her the mattress. She tried to argue. He shook his head. "Not for pride. I just sleep better by the heat." The next morning, she was up before him. Stove lit. Water boiled. She was staring out the window when he came in from feeding the horses. "You got chickens?" she asked without turning. He blinked. "Used to. Coyotes got him." She nodded. "I can fix that." Something changed in that moment. Not in him, but in the way the house felt. Like someone had cracked a window that had been sealed shut for years. Over the next few days, Lena started doing small things. Quietly. Washing clothes, straightening tools, tending the garden bed, even though the dirt was still frozen. She didn't ask for help, didn't ask for thanks. Jesse gave neither. He didn't know how, but every now and then, he caught her humming to herself under her breath. Off-key, almost too soft to notice. Still, she didn't talk about her past, and Jesse didn't press. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready, or maybe she never would. That was fine. He hadn't exactly spilled his own guts either. But one night, he came in late from the barn and found her kneeling by the bed, shaking. Not crying, not making a sound, just gripping the edge like she was holding herself up. He didn't speak, just set down his hat and waited. After a long moment, she said, "Do you ever wake up thinking you're still there?" He sat on the floor beside her. Not close, just near enough. "Yeah," he said, "all the time." She didn't look at him, but her hands loosened slightly. Neither of them said more, but something passed between them, something Jesse hadn't felt in years. Not comfort, not yet, but recognition. He hadn't bought a bride. That was what people would say, and on paper, maybe that's what it was. But this was something else. Two people trying to outrun the same kind of dark. Two ghosts with beating hearts. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, a man named Silas Dunn, older than most of the rocks in the river and twice as sharp. He'd lived on that land long enough to forget how to be polite, but he knew every inch of the county, and he'd known Jesse since the day he rode into town and bought the ruined property site unseen. Silas was the first to knock on Jesse's door after Lena arrived, not with welcome bread, but with a bundle of seed potatoes and a question in his eye. "So," he said, glancing at Lena as she moved quietly behind Jesse in the cabin. "That the bride?" Jesse didn't answer right away. He just took the bundle, gave a nod, and said, "She's got a name." Silas grunted. "Hope she's got grit too. This land don't care if a person's had a hard life. Eats the same either way." He left without another word. But after that, he started showing up more often. Sometimes to share tools, sometimes to talk about weather, and sometimes just to look at Jesse, at Lena, at the unspoken something that hung in the air between them. Lena never relaxed when Silas was around. She'd stop whatever she was doing, her back stiff, her mouth tight. She'd smile, but it never reached her eyes. Jesse noticed. It wasn't long before Silas brought his niece around, a girl named Marjorie who helped him with his house and pretended not to notice how long Jesse watched Lena when he thought no one was looking. Marjorie was soft-spoken, but not shy. She had that steady kind of beauty that didn't fade with wind or time, and she smiled too easily at Jesse. "You could have just married someone local," she told him once, half laughing, when Lena had stepped out to fetch water. "Would have saved you the trouble of shipping one in." Jesse didn't answer. "She's awful quiet," Marjorie said after a pause. "You sure she's all right in the head?" He didn't answer that either, just stared at the fire until she went silent. Lena came a moment later, her face unreadable, but Jesse saw the way her eyes flicked between them. She didn't ask what they were talking about. She didn't need to. By late April, the snow was gone, and Lena was in the yard each day, clearing brush, planting starts, fixing fences. She didn't complain. She didn't tire. But some mornings, Jesse found her crouched by the stream, face wet from more than just the cold water. He began to wonder where she'd run from. One afternoon, while digging post holes, Lena's dress caught on a nail sticking out of the barn door. Jesse went to help, but when he reached out to untangle the fabric, she jerked away like she'd been struck. Her breath came fast, and she dropped the feed bucket she'd been holding. He stepped back immediately, hands raised. "I ain't gonna touch you." "I know," she whispered, eyes glassy. It's just she didn't finish. That night, Jessie sat out on the porch long after the moon came up, thinking about her bruised wrists, the way she never let herself be near the window when the sun was going down, how she always jumped at dogs barking in the distance. Silas showed up again a few days later. This time, he brought a bottle and didn't ask permission to sit. "I heard something," he said as he pulled the cork out with his teeth. "About your girl." Jessie didn't move. She came out of New Madrid County, Missouri. That's a long way from here. A farmer and his boy passed through a few weeks back and swore they recognized her. Said a sheriff was looking for a girl disappeared from house fire there last fall. Said there was a man burned in his bed and a witness gone missing. Jessie looked him in the eye. "And you believe them?" Silas shrugged. "Don't matter what I believe. It matters who comes looking." Jessie didn't sleep that night. He just sat at the table, staring at the note she'd written to answer the ad, still folded in his coat pocket like it belonged there. The next morning, Lena was already outside, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. She looked calm, but Jessie noticed the dirt under her nails, the faint trembling in her left hand. "Who was he?" he asked quietly, not looking at her. She froze, then straightened up slowly. "You don't want to know." "I do." She leaned the hammer against the post and wiped her hands. "A man who owned everything. My name, my time, my skin. He liked quiet girls. Thought they broke easier." Jessie didn't speak. "I wasn't supposed to leave," she added. "But I did. That's all." She walked away then, and Jessie didn't follow. A few days later, the sheriff from Cold Bend came riding in with 2 deputies. Said they were passing through, looking for a fugitive woman. Lena saw them from the barn and didn't move. She just stood there, back straight, face calm. Jessie stepped in front of her before they could reach her. "Got no fugitives here," he said. One of the deputies narrowed his eyes. "We're not accusing, just asking." "She's my wife," Jessie said. "She's got my name now. That's all that matters." The sheriff stared at Lena for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, we'll be on our way." After they were gone, Lena sat down hard on the porch steps, her hands shaking. Jessie didn't say anything, just sat beside her. "You don't even know what I did," she said after a while. "I don't care. You should. Maybe. But I don't." A silence passed between them, different than before. Not empty, not heavy, just full. "I burned the house," she said finally, "with him in it. I waited until he was drunk, then lit the curtains and walked out. I didn't plan it. I just stopped being afraid." Jessie looked at her, really looked. Not like someone broken, not like someone dangerous, just someone who'd been shoved too far. "You still afraid?" he asked. "Only of what comes next." He nodded. "Me too." The next day, Marjorie showed up again. She brought pie and a smile that didn't feel so soft anymore. "You don't know who she is," she told Jessie when Lena went inside. "She could bring trouble. Maybe already has." Jessie didn't answer. "She's not what you need," Marjorie added. He looked her in the eye. "And what do I need?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The wind kicked up dust across the field. Jessie turned back toward the house, where Lena stood just behind the screen door, watching. There were secrets here now, not buried but breathing. And there was a storm coming, not in the sky, but between people. Jessie could feel it in the ground beneath his boots. He hadn't bought a bride. He'd bought a beginning. And some beginnings cost more than money. The rains came late that spring, drumming on the roof hard enough to rattle dishes in the cupboard. Jessie had taken to fixing fence lines in the valley while Lena stayed near the house, planting, patching, and keeping watch with a rifle he'd taught her to use. He'd seen her aim, steady hands, calm eye. It wasn't her first time holding one. Some nights, she'd sit at the table and polish it slowly, her mind somewhere else, like she was waiting for someone to come through the trees. That tension started to settle in Jessie's bones. like a storm building slow inside the walls of the cabin. Lena said little, but she didn't have to. Her quiet wasn't the kind of silence that made space. It was the kind that pulled everything into it. Then the first real blow came. Silas rode up one morning, mud on his coat and a weight in his eyes that Jesse hadn't seen before. "You got a visitor," he said, tossing a folded telegram onto the table. "Came to me by mistake. From Missouri." Jesse read the message in silence. "Man by the name of Clive Darnell, arriving Cold Bend, May 3rd. Claims to be husband of missing woman. Demands explanation. Not traveling alone." He didn't look up. "Lena," he said quietly. "You know that name?" Her face went white. Not fear, not surprise. Something worse. Recognition mixed with dread. "He's not dead," she whispered. "What?" Jesse felt his stomach drop. "I thought he was. The night I left, I saw the fire catch the ceiling. I heard him fall. But if that telegram's right, I didn't finish it." Jesse didn't speak for a moment. He just sat back in his chair, staring at the wood stove. "Who is he?" "He's the man who owned me," she said flatly. "Bought me from my stepfather when I was 16. Called it a dead arrangement. Took me like a prize. No preacher. No papers. Just me in a locked room." Silas cleared his throat, but didn't leave. "He beat me," Lena said, louder now, looking straight at Jesse. "Every week. Sometimes just for breathing too loud. I got out the only way I could." Jesse swallowed hard. "And now he's coming. With men." That night, the two of them sat at the table long past dark. The lamp burned low. Lena traced the rim of her cup with her finger. Jesse hadn't touched his food. "You want to run?" he asked finally. "No," she said. "I'm tired of running. You could go to town. Stay at the boarding house until it blows over." "I'm not hiding." Jesse looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw steel in her. Not the kind that flinched or froze, but the kind that broke chains. They spent the next day preparing. Jesse moved supplies into the cellar, checked the rifle stock, sharpened the hatchet. Lena packed a single bag. Not because she planned to leave, but because she was used to the idea that she might have to. Marjorie came by again, this time not with pie, but questions. "I heard about the man," she said, watching Lena with narrowed eyes. "They say he's her husband, that he's bringing legal papers." "He's nothing," Lena said without looking at her. "Law won't see it that way," Marjorie said. "They see a wife who ran from her man and a husband who wants her back. That's all." Jesse stood on the porch, hands on his hips. "She's my wife now." Marjorie looked at him, her voice low. "Are you sure she didn't lie about everything?" "I don't need to be sure," Jesse said. "I just need her safe." But he wasn't sure. Not really. That night, he lay awake on the floor near the stove, listening to Lena breathe. And he wondered, what if she had lied? What if there was more? What if she had left that man for a reason darker than she claimed? The doubt crawled inside him like rot. Not because he believed she was capable of cruelty, but because he knew what people would do when their backs were against a wall. He'd done things during the war that still lived in his blood. And she had that same look some nights, like something inside her never came home. May 3rd came with gray skies and no wind. Jesse rode into town at dawn, rifle under his coat. He tied his horse outside the mercantile and waited. The train rolled in late. 3 men stepped off, Clive Darnell in a long black coat and slick hat, thin as a knife and twice as cold. His face had burn scars along the left side. The other 2 were younger, clean-shaven, hands never far from their hips. Clive didn't smile when he saw Jesse. You Jesse Klein?" "I am. You got my wife. She's not yours anymore." Clive handed him a folded set of documents. "We'll let the sheriff sort that out." The sheriff didn't help. He stood on the porch of his office, chewing tobacco and looking tired. "You got a problem," he told Jesse flatly. "Man's got claim. No preacher ever declared her dead. Paperwork says she's still his. She was bought like cattle," Jesse said. "No license. No ceremony. That ain't a marriage." "Missouri might not care," the sheriff muttered. "But this is Wyoming, and we don't take kindly to burn houses and dead men, either." "She didn't kill him," The sheriff raised a brow. Didn't she? That night, Jesse returned home with a storm in his gut. Lena waited on the porch. He didn't speak right away. "They're here," she said quietly. He nodded. "They want to take it to court." "Then let them." "Lena, if they prove anything, I'll hang," she said simply. "Or they'll drag me back to Missouri in chains." Same difference. He sat down beside her, the wood creaking. "You could go. Tonight. I give you a head start. Take the gray mare. Head for the hills." She looked at him then, not angry, not afraid. Just tired. "You think I haven't done that before?" she whispered. "Run? Hide? I'm done being prey." For the first time in weeks, she took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but steady. "I didn't lie to you," she said. "But there are things I didn't say. Because saying them makes them real again." "Tell me now," Jesse said. So she did. She told him how Clive had locked her in the root cellar for 3 days after she dropped the plate. How he'd forced her to stand barefoot in the snow while he read scripture, saying her pain was holy. How he'd branded her with a hot spoon behind her shoulder where no one could see. Jesse didn't speak, just held her hand tighter. "They'll never believe me," she said. "Then I will." The next morning, Jesse stood outside the Cold Bend courthouse as the hearing began. Lena stood behind him in a plain dress and boots caked with mud. Clive stood across from him with his 2 men and a lawyer from back east. The judge, a tired man with red-rimmed eyes, listened to testimony, asked questions. Lena spoke clearly, calmly, with her chin up. She didn't cry. But the real twist came when Silas Dunn stepped forward. "I knew the man," he said. "Clive Darnell. Worked with his father years ago. Heard the rumors. Heard about the girls. Heard about what he did to his sister." Clive's lawyer shouted, "Objection. Irrelevant." Silas kept talking. "He ain't a husband. He's a trafficker. There's a reason his last 3 girls vanished." The judge banged his gavel, told Silas to sit. But the room had changed. And then the final turn. One of Clive's men, his youngest, stood up and walked forward. "I was there the night the fire started." She didn't set it. He did. He lit it trying to scare her into staying. He drank himself into a rage and tossed the lamp. The room went still. "You saw that?" the judge asked. "I did." She ran. I followed. He stayed behind. That was all it took. The judge tossed out the documents. So there was no claim to honor. That Lena was free to go wherever she wanted. Clive left town spitting blood and swearing revenge. Jesse watched him disappear, and for the first time, he let himself breathe. But the twist had cost him. Word spread fast. Some neighbors turned cold. Marjorie never came back. The town whispered louder now. Still, back at the ranch, something had shifted. Jesse and Lena worked side by side, but now there was no weight between them. No guessing, no walls. And one night, weeks later, when the sky cracked open with thunder and the earth smelled of rain, she curled up beside him on the floor by the stove, her head on his chest, and whispered, "I think I finally believe I'm not his anymore." He wrapped his arm around her and said, "You never were." The storm outside passed before dawn, but the storm inside them had changed direction. Not gone, but moving somewhere new. Summer came harsh and dry. The wind carried dust instead of rain, and the air grew tense, as if the land itself hadn't forgotten what had happened back in May. Folks in Cold Bend weren't a forgetful sort. Some nodded politely to Jesse in town, some didn't. But almost none looked Lena in the eye anymore. The judgment wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Silence did its work just fine. Lena felt it first when she went to the general store alone. Mrs. Raddick, who used to chat kindly about weather and pie crust, suddenly couldn't find the right flour and didn't bother offering help. A couple stepped aside when Lena walked by, like her shadow carried weight. She came back to the ranch tight-lipped, her hands trembling as she unpacked the sacks of grain. "I'm not welcome," she said. "They think I got away with something." Jesse wanted to say it didn't matter, that she didn't need them, but it didn't matter. The weight of a town's doubt seeps in quiet, like cold through cracked windows. And Jesse saw what it was doing to her. He saw how she spoke less, stood straighter, tried harder to be invisible again. That crushed him more than the gossip. Even their marriage, built slowly out of need and silence, began to feel its strain. They hadn't spoken of love, not once. Jesse wasn't a man who handed out words like that easily. Lena didn't expect them, but now that the world had turned its back on her, something in her needed to hear them. Not as payment, not as comfort, as truth. "You think I did wrong," she said one night as they sat by the fire. Her voice was soft but steady. Jesse looked up from polishing his boots. "No, you think I became wrong," she continued. "That I carry something now I didn't before. I think the world treated you like dirt," he said. "And I think you rose out of it anyway. But you don't touch me like you used to." Jesse stared at the fire. He hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had. Maybe the closeness had begun to feel dangerous, too sharp with everything between them out in the open. Maybe he feared that giving her love would make him responsible for breaking her again. Lena stood. "I need more than a roof and a name. I need to matter, Jesse." "You do," he said, rising too. "You matter more than anything I've ever had. But you don't look at me that way. I look at you like I don't want to lose you." "That's not the same," she said. Then, quieter, "That's fear, not love." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The word felt too big in his chest. The next day, they worked opposite ends of the ranch. Jesse drove the cattle down toward the creek. Lena stayed behind, cleaning out the barn. When he came back, he found her staring at a bundle of clothes on the porch, tied tight with a bit of twine. "You leaving?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I want you to understand I could." He looked at the bundle, then at her. "I never stopped you. You never asked me to stay either." That night, he didn't sleep. The silence between them was worse than the fights he'd seen in war. Worse because it came from love trying to grow in soil poisoned by doubt. Then the ranch got hit. It started small. Gate left open, chickens scattered, one calf missing. Jesse figured it was coyotes or a storm. But 2 nights later, the barn door was wide open. Inside, paint had been slashed across the walls in red. "Liar's Bride." Lena found it before he did. She didn't scream, just stared, quiet and cold. "They want me to leave," she said. "I don't care what they want. They want you to choose." "I already did." "Did you?" They boarded the barn shut. Jesse rode to town to speak to the sheriff, but the man only shrugged. No one saw anything. Could have been kids. Could have been anyone. Could have been Clive Darnell's men. Could have been, the sheriff said. But he's long gone. "You sure you didn't make new enemies since then?" Jesse left town more furious than when he arrived. Not just at the people, but at himself, for not knowing how to shield her from this, for not knowing if she even wanted him to. That night, he sat beside Lena on the porch as the sky turned black. "I love you," he said suddenly. She blinked, turned to him slowly. "I don't know how to say it pretty. I've never loved clean, but I feel it. In my gut, in my hands when I reach for you and stop myself. In the way I count your footsteps even when I ain't looking." She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I believe you. I don't need you to say it again. I just need you to act like it." "I will." And he did. Over the next days, he made changes. Stood beside her at the store. Took her hand when people stared. Told Marjorie, when she tried to speak up again, "You don't talk to her, you don't talk to me." Still, the ranch wasn't safe. A week after the barn was vandalized, their well was poisoned. Lena noticed the strange taste in the water first. Jesse dumped the buckets and spent 2 days cleaning the system, digging up the line. When he returned from the creek that evening, he found Lena kneeling by a small mound behind the barn. Her eyes were distant. In her hands, a small, worn handkerchief, the kind stitched with initials. He knelt beside her. "What is it?" She unfolded it slowly, like something sacred. "My sister's," she said. "She was 10 when Clive bought me. She begged him to let her come too. Said she'd cook clean." He laughed. Said he only needed one. "After I escaped, I went back once. Quiet at night. The house was ash. I don't know if she made it out." Jesse felt a chill that wasn't from the wind. He reached out, rested a hand on her back. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "No. She'd ask why I didn't come back for her. You did what you had to. You survived. I want to live now," she said. not just survive. And in that moment, Jesse realized it wasn't about protection anymore. It was about partnership. She didn't want to be kept safe like something fragile. She wanted to fight beside him, to face what came, and to belong on her own terms. So they started making plans. Jesse hired 2 new hands from across county lines, men who didn't ask questions and didn't mind working for a woman who kept a rifle near her sewing kit. They rebuilt the barn doors, redug the well deeper, posted signs and watchdogs. They fought side by side now, against drought, against neighbors, against memory. Some nights, they still slept apart, but not out of distance. Just habit. Then one morning, a letter came from a court in Missouri. Inside, a warning. Clive Darnell had filed new papers claiming damages, accusing Lena of theft, slander, and conspiracy. The state had dismissed the charges locally, but he was pushing higher. He was threatening to drag her into a federal trial. Lena folded the letter calmly. He won't stop. Jesse looked at her. Then neither will we. The stakes had changed again. It wasn't about Cold Bend anymore. It wasn't about gossip. Now it was about who got to decide what a woman's life was worth. We'll go to court, Jesse said. They won't believe me. They will. Because this time I'll speak too. About what? About what it does to a man, he said, when he watches someone suffer and does nothing. About what it means to stand next to someone, not behind. They knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but something in both of them had hardened into resolve. And through it all, Lena never packed again. Her bundle stayed on the shelf by the door, untouched and used. That, more than anything, told Jesse where her heart truly lived. The summons came 3 weeks later, official and sharp, sealed with a federal crest and addressed not just to Lena, but to Jesse too. They would have to travel to Cheyenne for a hearing. A real courtroom, real judge, real testimony. Clive Darnell was dragging her passed out into the open again, this time on record. The accusations were ugly: fraud, arson, and attempted murder. And there were no guarantees she'd walk away free this time. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was war. Lena read the letter once, then set it down and didn't speak. "You don't have to go," Jesse said quietly, watching her from the table. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice even. "Because if I don't, he wins." He knew she was right, but fear had settled heavy in his chest, cold and slow. He didn't fear the law, not really. What he feared was what the courtroom would ask of her, what it would rip out, what it would uncover, and how much she could take before it broke her all over again. They left 3 days later, bags packed with more than clothes, documents, letters, Lena's old scars hidden under long sleeves. The ride to Cheyenne was long and quiet. Jesse kept close, but words felt useless. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was preparing for war. In Cheyenne, the courthouse loomed tall and gray like a tombstone. Inside, polished marble floors echoed with footsteps, and the air smelled like ink and dust. They were met by a clerk who looked bored until he saw Lena's name on the papers. Then he looked nervous. The trial opened quietly. Clive's lawyer, a thin-lipped man from St. Louis, began with charm and calmness, painting Clive as a man wronged, a husband abandoned, a victim of fire and lies. He presented signed papers, grainy photographs, sworn statements from old neighbors in Missouri. None of it proved much, but the doubt it seeded was sharp and heavy. Then Clive himself took the stand. Burn scars pulled at his cheek, but his voice was smooth as oil. He spoke like a preacher, earnest, calculated, dripping with false sorrow. Said Lena had been unstable, that she'd run with men, that she'd been prone to spells and moods ever since she was a girl. He even mentioned Jesse, claiming he'd lured her away, manipulated her, helped her cover up the fire. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just sat still, fingers interlaced, jaw tight. When it was her turn to testify, the court went still. She walked to the stand in a plain brown dress, sleeves buttoned to her wrists, hair tied back. She spoke simply about the night Clive came in her life, about the cellar, the beatings, the way he bought her body from her stepfather without a question. She didn't use big words. She didn't embellish. But when she paused and said, "I lived like I was dead," not a single person shifted in their seat. "I didn't burn that house," she said. "He did. I ran. He was drunk and angry. I heard him knock over the lamp. I didn't look back. Maybe I should have." She glanced at Jesse then, just once. The prosecution tried to tear her apart, brought up the missing sister, the unaccounted years, the fact she'd married again without paperwork, the fact she'd stayed quiet. But she didn't bend. Jesse took the stand next. He hadn't planned to, but when he saw the way the jury looked at her, curious, guarded, he knew he had to say something more than what was on the page. He told them about the first night she arrived, about the way she never asked for anything, how she worked until her hands cracked, how she flinched when dogs barked, and sat by the window like she was waiting to be hunted. He talked about the writing on the barn, the poison well, the way people changed the minute her past came to light. "She's not perfect," he said. "Neither am I. But she's good. And she's brave. And I'd rather stand next to her in truth than behind anyone else in comfort." That was the truth. All of it. And Lena cried for the first time in front of people who could ruin her. One tear, slow and silent, and Jesse didn't look away. But even truth has enemies. That night, as they prepared to rest in a rented room above the stable house, Jesse stepped outside for air. The city was still, but behind him, something moved. He turned too late. A figure came from the shadows. A fist struck his jaw, sending him crashing against the wall. Then a boot hit his ribs. He heard a voice, low and breathless. "You should have kept her quiet." Then the attacker fled. Jesse lay stunned in the dirt, blood in his mouth, pain splintering through his side. Lena found him moments later. She knelt, her hands shaking, touching his cheek. "It was him," Jesse rasped. "Or someone he paid. I should have killed him when I had the chance," she whispered, voice trembling with something raw. "Don't say that. I mean it." She helped him inside, sat with him all night, her eyes wide and sleepless. By morning, the bruise on his jaw had spread purple. The doctor said nothing was broken, but Jesse moved slower, winced more. In court the next day, neither of them mentioned the attack. It would have helped Lena's case, but Jesse knew that fight would only make things worse. Then came the final testimony. A surprise witness, an old woman from Missouri, wrapped in black shawls, eyes sunken but steady. She was a midwife. She'd been there the night Lena's mother died, and she'd seen what became of Lena in the years after. "She was a child when he took her," the woman said. "I told folks, but no one listened. Said it was a family matter. Said men had rights over their homes. But I saw her bruises. I saw the look in her eyes. And when she vanished, I prayed she made it far." The judge asked if she had any proof. "No," the woman said. "Only my word. But it's better than silence." The room was quiet after that. Still. Then Clive stood up in the back of the courtroom and shouted, "They're all liars. All of them." The bailiff moved fast, restrained him, pulled him out. The sound of his shouting faded down the hall. The next day, the verdict came. Not guilty. No fraud. No arson. No crime. No return to Missouri. Lena was declared free under federal law. No man could claim her. No state could chase her. Outside the courtroom, she stood next to Jesse as the sky darkened. Rain began to fall soft and steady, streaking the window glass. They didn't smile. Not yet. They were free, but not whole. Freedom doesn't erase pain. It only gives it space to breathe. In the following days, the town of Cold Bend seemed distant. Even though they had won, the fight had drawn a line too deep to cross again. Jesse and Lena returned to the ranch, knowing full well that some neighbors would never forget what had happened, that some wouldn't forgive her for surviving. But a surprise came the first Sunday after their return. Silas Dunn arrived at the cabin early. He brought lumber and nails. No words, just supplies. Then, behind him, came the young man who testified against Clive, one of his former men, now quiet, changed, seeking work, maybe redemption. Lena stood on the porch and nodded. We've got room. And then, even Marjorie came, shy, hands full of seeds. I was wrong, she said. You're braver than all of us. Lena took the seeds without speaking. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe something like it. That evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, Jesse and Lena sat on the porch again. His bruises were healing. Her face was calm. I still dream of the fire, she said. I dream of the war. They looked at each other. But I don't wake up afraid anymore, she added. Neither do I. And then Jesse turned to her, really turned, and took her face in both hands. You were never just something I bought. You were the only thing I ever chose. She closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. You chose right, she said. And for the first time, they kissed like people who knew their past, accepted its weight, and still chose each other anyway. The wind rose in the trees, but it didn't sound like warning anymore. It sounded like a promise. The ranch was quiet now, not the kind of quiet that follows pain, but the kind that comes after surviving it. Summer had passed, and the first chill of fall swept over the hills. The sky was always a little paler, the days shorter, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer tense. It felt like peace, the hard-earned kind, the kind that comes only after standing through a storm without breaking. Lena spent most mornings in the garden, where green things now grew freely. Her hands, once used to flinching and shielding, now dug deep into soil. She liked the feel of it, solid, honest. Jesse watched her sometimes from the barn, not saying anything, just watching, and realizing that loving someone didn't mean trying to erase their past. It meant living with it, side by side, without shame. Their life had grown into a rhythm, mending fences, boiling coffee, speaking without speaking. The hired hands did their work without complaint, and no one asked questions about Lena. Not anymore. The townspeople still kept their distance, but it didn't sting the way it used to, because now she had her own piece of land, her own home, and a man beside her who hadn't walked away when it got hard to stay. The scars hadn't faded, not the ones on her body, not the ones buried under her quiet. Some nights, Jesse still woke to find her sitting upright in bed, eyes open, listening to the wind like it might carry voices from the past. But she no longer packed a bag. She no longer measured the door with her eyes. One evening, as the leaves began to fall like slow-turning coins, Jesse came in from the field to find her at the stove, stirring a pot with her sleeves rolled up. He leaned in the doorway and said softly, "You ever think about leaving again?" She didn't turn. "Sometimes." He nodded. "Why don't you?" She stopped stirring, looked over her shoulder. "Because this is the only place I've ever been seen as a person." That answer stayed with him. It was simple, and it hurt in all the right ways. It told him what he needed to know, that all the courtrooms, all the scars, all the late nights and cold mornings, they had built something stronger than survival. They'd built something real. Later that week, she found an envelope on the porch. No name, just a scrap of paper inside with a few clumsy lines scrawled across it. She shouldn't have lived, but she did. I was wrong. It was unsigned, but Jesse recognized the handwriting. Clive's youngest man, the one who'd turned against him, who now worked in the South Fields and never looked Lena in the eye. She folded the note, didn't say a word about it, and dropped it into the fire that night. Forgiveness, she'd learned, didn't always need a voice. Sometimes it only needed an ending. As the first snow came in soft flurries, Jesse and Lena stood at the edge of the property, watching the hills go white. He reached for her hand. He didn't do that often in public, but something in the quiet pushed him to. "You regret any of it?" he asked. She took a long breath. "Not surviving. Not staying. What about me?" She looked at him then, really looked. "You didn't save me, Jesse. I saved myself. But you made it feel like it mattered." And that, more than anything, was the truth that held them together. There would still be hard seasons, still nights when fear came creeping through the cracks in the walls. But the worst had passed. The world had tried to label her runaway, liar, killer, wife. She'd shed them all. What remained was just Lena. Not bought, not owned, not broken. And Jesse, he'd spent so long building a life with no room for softness. But in her silence, he found something stronger than noise. He'd found a woman who didn't just survive the fire. She'd walked out of it holding her own name. They stood there as the wind picked up, brushing snow from their shoulders, and neither said another word. Because some stories don't end with a kiss or a promise. Some just settle into the land, quiet and steady, and stay there, like the first roots after a long, dry winter. And in that silence, something sacred lived. Not in the drama, but in the ordinary. In two people who'd once been broken, now watching the snow fall on a ranch they built from ruin. Together,